Hi everyone, I'm coming to you from my home office, and I just want to spend a few minutes talking about parenting and giving some strategies that worked for Ken and me. Ken and I have been parents for 25 years now. It's hard to believe, the time goes fast. But I just want to share with you some things that worked for us. And you know, we were in no way perfect parents. We made so many mistakes. And yet I think the thing that helped us the most was prayer. We prayed so much for our kids. Ken and I prayed together for our kids, but you know, honestly, he and I prayed individually so much for our kids. I would spend every morning of every day, year after year after year, praying for my kids, praying for their strengths, calling forth their gifts. I asked God to tell me what each one of their gifts were. And I would pray and call those forth, and I still do that today, even though two of them are grown and out of the house. I still call forth those gifts that I believe God has put in their lives. But I would also spend time praying about weaknesses that I saw about them, about struggles that I felt like they were going through, and attitude adjustments that they need. I just came before God honestly in prayer and just said, God, would you help us as parents? And I came honestly before God as a parent saying, God, I am not handling this well. I am not handling this child well. God, yesterday I responded in anger to a child, or I exploded in anger at a child, and I just called a spade, and I treated God like he was my best friend, because he is, and just constantly came before him asking for his help. The scripture says that he is wonderfully able to help us in times of need, and I feel like as a parent, I just lived in times of need. The parent of 4 boys, God gave us the awesome and the overwhelming responsibility of raising 4 boys. And there were many days and even years that I didn't feel up to the task. Like, God, I just don't know if I can do this today. Like, I'm tired of the fight, God. And yet the Lord strengthened me. He's my strength and my shield, and my heart trusts in him, and I am helped. So I just want to share with you some things that I did over the years that helped me. You know, the goal, I think, in life for most of us, the goal in our homes is to live in peace. Is there any emotion greater than peace? And we want to create a home where it's peaceful. I wanted to create a home where my kids wanted to come home, where my husband wanted to come home, that they didn't come home to strife. They didn't come home to anger. They didn't come home to a mess even. I wanted them to come home to a place where it felt safe, where it felt secure. But to do that, there had to be like boundaries in place. And I'm gonna talk about that, I think, next time. But we have to set boundaries with our kids, and we have to follow through on our word. But there was a scripture that I put up on my refrigerator years and years ago, probably 20 to 25 years ago. It's from Lamentations 3:27. It's a scripture I memorized, and this is it from the NIV. It says, "It is good for a man to bear the yoke while he is still young." And you know, yoke isn't a term we use much anymore, but the Bible refers to a yoke a lot. My dad always talked about a yoke. And basically, it's a piece of wood that goes between like 2 oxen or 2 horse, and it yokes them together, but it puts them under the submission of whoever's driving the yoke, of the farmer that's plowing the field. And the yoke causes them to do what the leader, the farmer, tells them to do, but the animals have to be willing to submit to that yoke and to follow it. And so NIV again says, "It is good for a man to bear the yoke while he is in his youth." The New Living says it this way: "It is good for people to submit at an early age to the yoke of his discipline." And so one of my goals as a parent was to teach my boys to learn to submit to Ken and me as parents, but to submit to me as a mom. You know, this may surprise you a little bit when you think about our personalities at church, but at home, Ken was the stronger parent. He was the more authoritarian parent. He was the stronger disciplinarian. I was kind of more the easygoing parent. Like if the boys wanted to do something, almost always they would come and ask me first, because I tended to say yes more. Ken tended to say No more, unless that always flipped when it came to anything dangerous. Like if they wanted to do something that I felt like was dangerous, I would always say no, and Ken would almost always say yes. So our boys got very good at discerning when to ask mom and when to ask dad, and sometimes they would try to work us against each other, but Ken and I were pretty good at always trying to be on the same page. Like I would say, it's okay with me, but you got to work that out with your dad. And they would always be like, or if it was something that they wanted to do that was kind of risky, they would talk to him and he would say, okay, but make sure your mom is okay with it. And they wouldn't want to talk to me about it. But the point is that I tended to be kind of the more lenient parent, but as such, I still had to be in control. Have you gone to someone's home, or maybe you even feel this sometimes in your own home, where you wonder who's in control? Are the kids leading the house, or are the parents leading the house? And if you want to have a peaceful home, then the parents have to be leading the home. Kind of in the same vein, if you want to have a peaceful life, God has to be leading your life. And it's so easy for all of us to want to take control and get in the driver's seat. But if there's going to be peace, then I, as the parent, Ken was gone at work all day long. And when you have young toddlers, I was a stay-at-home mom. But often I had a secondary job that I had to go do. And so I needed peace in my home so I could do my job. But I had to have my boys be willing to let me do that. So I had to be in charge. I had to lead them well. I was in a store recently where I saw this totally out of order, where the kids were totally in charge. And it all happened right in front of me. And I just felt sorry for the mom. And I kind of want to tell you what happened. But the kids were just, she had 2 children, and both of them were just wanting to go and play. They did not want to be shopping in a store. And I get that. And so she made all these threats to them, but they were all empty threats. This is literally like, I remembered what she said because some of her threats were so outlandish. But she said, if you don't stay right here next to me, we're going to go get in the car and leave. And there's nothing wrong with that. I have made that threat before. The problem is that when they didn't stay right next to her, she didn't go get in the car and leave. She just gave him another threat. So the next threat that I remember that she said is, if you do that again, I'm going to start screaming at you. Well, I was like, is she going to? Like, this could be good entertainment. But she didn't. She just got increasingly frustrated. Like her cup, if you think of your life as a cup, her cup got so full with her kids to the point where she was just kind of falling apart. And so the third threat that I heard her make was, if you do that again, I will never speak to you again. And I just thought, that's an outlandish threat that you can't keep. And then her final threat, and this is where it just went, you could just tell she was just beside herself, so frustrated. She said, if you do that again, I will leave you in the store and go home without you. She literally said that to her 2 kids. And I just thought, you're not going to do that. I pray that you don't do that. That's a horrible threat. And what are you teaching your kids? But the thing was that she was trying so hard to get control of her kids, and yet she wasn't willing to follow through with anything that she said. And one of the things that I felt like helped me be an effective mom to all of these boys was that when I made a threat, I followed through. Like if I said, if you're going to do that again, you're going to go to your room. And if they did it again, they would go to their room. Now, I made some outlandish threats too. I remember one time I said to them, if you do that again, I'm going to take you and turn you upside down and shake you. And then I thought, what kind of bizarre threat is that? So of course they were going to do it. Like, is she really going to follow through? So then it just became this really funny, humorous exchange between us, which took all of the angst out of the situation of them not obeying. Like, it became a fun thing. But of course they did it again. And this child was probably 2 or 3. So I literally picked the child up in fun, not in anger at all. It was totally a joke. And I said, okay, now I'm going to turn you upside down. I turned the child up, and then I just kind of very lightly shake them and said, see, you did it again. And that's what I did. But it was a totally teachable moment. Even though my threat was outlandish, I still followed through. And that's just a big key to parenting. If you tell your kids to do something and they don't do it, and then you give them a consequence, you must follow through. but you've got to make your consequences reasonable. In other words, and this is something that my parents said to Ken and I all the time, they said, don't over punish your kids. Like, don't ground them for 2 weeks from everything. Because the first problem with that is that it just takes away hope. Like, kids just have no hope. That's just too long. But the second thing that it does is if I ground them for 2 weeks, say on a Wednesday, from everything, and they then disobey on a Thursday or even an hour later on Wednesday, what do I have to, I have no longer, I don't have any consequences to give them anymore. I've taken everything away. And so they have no motivation whatsoever to do what I say because they're already sunk. And so take things away in little increments. In other words, I told you not to do that. And so the consequence for that is that you have to spend an hour in your room. And then make them spend an hour in their room. Or since you did that again, the consequences is that you can't watch TV tonight. And that's hard. Because if the family's watching TV, you have to make sure that they aren't in the room. But if you ground them from TV for like 5 days, in my opinion, it's too long. Ground them in small increments that you can live with and that they can survive with hope. It's like you need the punishment to hurt, but you don't want it to hurt so bad that it becomes hopeless for them. I quoted you Lamentations 3:27. It is good for people to submit to an early age to the yoke of his discipline. And really the goal was to teach my children that when I said something, I expected them to do it. Like I lived with the expectation that they were going to do it. I think some parents live with the expectation that their kids aren't going to do it. And that just makes life miserable. And it doesn't promote peace. And so set yourself up that you give your child an expectation and you expect them to do it. And maybe you pray, God, I've lived not expecting this child to obey me. Change that. Change that in me, that I would have the expectation for success, that I'm going to teach them to obey. So teaching them to submit at an early age to authority. As a mom, to submit to my authority. It was easier for our boys to follow Ken's authority, again, because he was the stronger parent. And maybe because I was the mom and they were boys, and maybe, I don't need to obey my mom. They learned that that wasn't going to work out well for them. But again, the goal was to have peace in our home. And to establish peace, there had to be expectations, there had to be boundaries, there had to be rules, and the rules had to be followed. And when they weren't, there had to be a consequence. And sometimes there was a short consequence, and then sometimes a consequence was then added to it, or even a third consequence added to it, until they were at a place where they were willing to say, okay, I was wrong, I did that, will you please forgive me? And then there was just a conversation, okay, this is still the consequence. I'm not taking away the consequence, but I'm going to help you endure the consequence. And I remember many times one of my sons had to go to his room, and he would have to spend because the consequences kept getting more and more severe. Finally, the last consequence was you have to spend the day or the evening in your room. And I would actually serve him his meals in his room, and we would call that room service. That he was getting room service. But when he finally got to the place where he wasn't just controlled by anger and he was willing to submit, then I would go hang out with him in his room. Like, he still was in his room. The consequence was still in place, but I would try to make the consequences easy to swallow, and maybe I'd go play a card game or something in his room. And just to try to make it more palatable, but you had to follow through. That's a huge point in teaching your kids to obey you, is that you have to follow through. And my goal and Ken's goal was to teach our kids to obey our voice at an early age, because I've said this many times, when they become teenagers, all you have is your voice. And so if you haven't taught them to obey what you tell them with your voice at an early age, you're in trouble when they're teenagers. So no matter how old your kids are right now, teach them to obey what you say, because the goal then is to teach them to obey what a boss says, so that they don't live with rebellion toward a boss, or they don't live with rebellion toward a teacher, even when things aren't fair. It's easy to get angry when things aren't fair, but we still have to learn to submit. And ultimately, my goal was to teach them to submit to God. that just makes life easier. If they can learn to submit to God at an early age, it makes life easier. So this is just something that Ken and I did as parents, was learning to teach our kids to obey our voice, and when they didn't, there were consequences.